Ravnica Remastered is an upcoming Magic set that is entirely comprised of reprints from throughout Magic's history, specifically from sets that take place on Ravnica. If it's anything like Dominaria Remastered this year, it'll feature much needed reprints as well as have a really fun limited environment. But we don't know that. It could have terrible reprints and not have any of the cards people are actually looking to get their hands on. While we know a couple of the cards, we don't know most of the set. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about 10 cards that I think need to be in Ravnica Remastered in order for me to be happy with the reprints included. Let's jump into them. Starting off, number 10 is Illusionist Bracers. It's a 2-cost artifact equipment, and it says whenever an ability of equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, you get to copy it. Then you may choose new targets for the copy. This card primarily sees play in Commander, which is the most popular format, and it's really good in the decks it's in because it'll typically be in a deck that has a Commander with a specific activated ability that doubling it up would be really good. Plus, it's colorless, so any deck can use it. You know, cards like Queen Caleb and Krug or Oswald Fiddlebender both love this card in the deck. This card is really good, and outside of a random printing on the list, which really doesn't impact price, this thing hasn't seen a printing since the original printing in Gatecrash. The card itself is only going for about $6, but I think that's because it's not one of those cards that you necessarily go out of your way to buy. But if someone were to open it from a pack, it's a card that would see play, and that's really what I want to see. I want to be able to open a pack of Ravnica Remastered and get useful cards out of it. Yes, big expensive reprints are great, but that's not going to be able to be in every pack. So if the remaining packs have useful cards that are actually going to go in decks, that's what I want to see. Speaking of useful cards, Rapid Hybridization is a 1-cost blue instant that has you destroy target creature and its controller creates a 3/3. This is one of the best blue removal spells dealing with things that have already hit the board. For just 1 mana at instant speed, it can just deal with a lot of different threats, and the card was creeping up in price. It did just see a reprint in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan Commander, but this is one of those cards that in theory every blue deck should have, so I'd like the price on this one to go even lower. It's very similar to the previous one. This is not necessarily an expensive card, it's just a good card that will see play, and if this is in the uncommon slot in Ravnica Remaster, that would be great. Speaking of the uncommon slot and kind of the last card that kind of fits in this category, we have the 10 Signets. You probably know them. They're Izzet Signet, Rakdos Signet, Boros Signet, some of the best mana rocks in Commander. They are 2-cost artifacts that you pay 1 and tap them to add 2 mana of the colors of that guild. These things are must-runs in a ton of different Commander decks, and while they're not expensive, if I could get my hands on just a bunch of them by opening some of these packs, again, those are cards that are not just going to be put in a box, but instead are actually going to be used. Now we're going to get into some of the spicier stuff. The next card is Magewright Stone. It's a 2-cost artifact that you can pay 1 and tap to untap target creature that has an activated ability that requires it to tap. Similar to Illusionist Bracers, this is really good in any Commander deck that has a Commander that wants to tap, so it just naturally goes into a bunch of different decks. And similar to that as well, this is only ever seeing a printing in Dissension, and it was randomly reprinted in a Mystery Booster Retail Edition, which again really doesn't impact the price. This is a card that isn't necessarily crazy expensive, but it is really good in the decks that want it, and so getting more of them into circulation, lowering that price to a more reasonable price, $1 to $2 would be great, allowing people to get their hands on this, as this isn't a big flashy spell. Personally, I am okay spending a little bit more money on a fun spell that's going to win me the game or is super duper synergistic with my deck. For something as simple as just untapping a creature, especially one that's so limited as this, it doesn't feel worth $10. It doesn't feel like something I want to spend that amount of money on. I'd rather spend 1 to 2 as just a good value piece in my deck. Now we're actually getting into some of the splashier, more expensive, more fun cards that I want to see in there, and one of them is Bolas' Citadel. This card has won many games, but in case you're lucky enough to have never lost to it, it's a 6-cost black legendary artifact that has you look at the top card of your library at any time, and then you can play the top card of your library. If you were to cast a spell this way, however, you pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay its mana cost. Then you can tap and sacrifice 10 non-land permanents, and each opponent loses 10 life. This card is really fun, really powerful, and really hard to reprint, and that's one of the big reasons I want to see it in Ravnica Remastered. If this card was called Big Building, it could be reprinted into any set that has buildings in it, but this is Bolas' Citadel, which is legendary and refers to a specific building in a specific plane at a specific time, because Bolas' Citadel most likely doesn't exist on Ravnica. Bolas is in the meditation realm, and this is a legendary artifact that is very specific to War of the Spark, so that means it can never really be in a standard set. Ravnica Remastered is the perfect time to reprint this because it's not only a set that's detached from the timeline and the story of the game, but it's meant to be kind of a nostalgic look back and hopefully give you kind of the highlights of Ravnica over the 3 blocks of sets that take place on it. It's a fun card that sees play, that's hard to reprint, that's worth a decent amount, and I really hope we get to see it. Either way, let's move on to the next card. The next card being Crypt Ghast, which is a 4-cost black 2/2 with Extort, meaning you can pay a little extra mana to deal damage to your opponents and gain life, but then whenever you tap a swamp for mana, you get to add black to your mana pool. This is a card originally printed in Gatecrash and then only reprinted once, that being in Commander 2014, and it's a really great card, especially in mono black decks, essentially doubling your mana and giving you Extort, which is extra good in Commander, where you pay 1 mana to deal 1 damage to each opponent and gain 3 life. It's overall a really great card that sees some niche play in CEDH and is just really good in a lot of different decks, and has kind of crept up to $11 or $12, which would be nice to see that drop a little bit and be a little bit more accessible as a fun card that mono black or maybe 2-color decks want to run. Alright, next up in slot 4, I am definitely cheating. This is 4 cards, not 1, so this list technically has, 13 cards that I didn't advertise with the 10 signets instead of 1 card, and these 4 cards, but I think it makes a lot of sense to group these together. We have Liliana Dreadhorde General, Teferi Time Raveler, Tezzeret Master of the Bridge, and Karn the Great Creator. These are all Planeswalkers from War of the Spark that see some amount of play in different formats. Liliana Dreadhorde General is one of the best Liliana Planeswalkers we've ever seen. Teferi Time Raveler sees play in like every format it's legal in. Karn the Great Creator is another amazing card, and Tezzeret Master of the Bridge was a buy-a-box promo back with War of the Spark, so it didn't see a ton of printings there. For that reason, they are some of the most expensive cards to exist in a Ravnica set, and due to the lack of emphasis on Planeswalkers moving forward, where we only get 1 per set, and the fact that these represent legendary characters at a specific time, will Liliana ever be a Dreadhorde General again? Maybe, but it makes it really hard to print into other sets, and so if we're taking a set where we're supposed to be looking back on Ravnica, I think it would be really great if we could get all 4 of these Planeswalkers in the set, as they're hard to reprint, see play in a multitude of formats, and are all really cool fun cards that people are going to want to pull. Next up, Guardian Project is a 4-cost green enchantment that I really hope is in this set. It says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, you get to draw a card. Essentially, if you don't have any creatures with the same name, every time you play a creature, you get to draw a card, and that is a very powerful effect that a lot of decks are looking for, specifically in Commander, where you're not going to have any creatures with the same name unless you're playing some weird Relentless Rats deck. This card is going for between $12 and $15, and so it's going to be a card that a lot of decks are wanting, but it is pretty expensive as a card. It's not doing anything particularly synergistic or fun with any decks, but it's a card that a lot of decks just should run at a base level. It's one of those cards, like, again, I'm willing to spend money on a fun, splashy card, and this is a very, very good card, but it's not a fun one to buy at an expensive price, so I'm hoping we can see a reprint of it, drop it to like $5, and just have it be a great card that a lot of green decks get to run without spending a ton of money on it. Alright, next up is Cloudstone Curio, which is a 3-cost artifact that says, whenever a non-artifact permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a permanent type with it to its owner's hand. This was a card originally in original Ravnica. It was reprinted as a masterpiece, which obviously really doesn't lower the price, and then as a box topper in Tales of Middle-earth Commander, which definitely dropped the price on it a little bit, but it's one of those cards that just hasn't seen a major reprinting in a set in quite some time, and there are some decks that absolutely love this. I have one of these cards in my Kadena deck, which is a morph deck that takes advantage of bouncing creatures back to my hand constantly to get value. This thing can be an engine all by itself and can combo with a lot of other cards to give you a ton of value in a ton of different decks. Overall, it's just a great card that's powerful, and a lot of decks are wanting it, and it really hasn't seen a reprint in a major set ever. Number 1, the card I want in Ravnica Remastered the most, it's Cyclonic Rift. It's a 2-cost blue instant that has you return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, then you can overload it for 7 and return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand at instant speed. This card is utterly insane, allowing you to bounce all of your opponent's stuff, including artifacts, enchantments, everything, and leaving your board untouched at instant speed can often win the game, just completely wiping out your opponents. I don't think you need me to tell you that. Most people know what Cyclonic Rift is. If you haven't, you are very, very lucky. But that brings me to a good point. There are some cards from Ravnica sets that are not on this list that you might have expected. Things like Doubling Season, Smothering Tithe, and Finale of Devastation, all of which that were in Commander Masters, and I really don't think will be in Ravnica Remastered because they just saw that reprint. Doubling Season and Smothering Tithe actually saw double reprints this year, both being in Commander Masters and Wilds of Eldraine Enchanting Tales, and I can't imagine they would do 3 reprints that close together, so those ones I'm fairly confident on unless they're trying to crash the prices, which would be good. It would let people get their hands on staples. Finale of Devastation almost made the list, but I feel like it's one of those cards that, there are decks that want to run it, but it's not as ubiquitous as Cyclonic Rift. Cyclonic Rift is just everywhere and every blue deck wants it. It's similar to Finale of Devastation. I would be happy if Finale gets reprinted, but I wanted to keep it to one card that saw a major reprint in 2023, just because I don't know if necessarily we're going to see that many cards that just saw reprints. I'd be happy to be wrong, but Cyclonic Rift is kind of taking the place of Doubling Season, Smothering Tithe, and Finale of Devastation, all of which are going to be the top hits for the set in general. Either way, those are my 10 picks for the cards that I want to see reprinted in Ravnica Remastered that aren't already revealed. Obviously, I'm excited for the Shockland reprint, but they've already announced that, so there's no point in me speculating on that. Let me know what you guys want from past Ravnican sets reprinted into Ravnica Remastered, and if you're excited for Ravnica Remastered at all, let me know that as well in the comments below. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.